today's mindful moment, packed with insights but designed to fit into your busy life. One deep dive at a time.
Okay, so picture this. You're arriving in a totally new place, and it's like nothing you've ever experienced before.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the air is so thick, it's almost like you can taste it. And you're looking out from the plane window. You see all this lush green landscape, maybe even some little flowers dotting the scenery, but they almost look fragile, like pale and doomed somehow.
Hmm.
And then the moment you actually step off that plane, everything shifts. I mean, instead of some polite greeting, you're just completely engulfed by this chanting broil of sound. And that first breath you take, it's just heavy with this, odor of perspirating bodies, like sensory overload times 1,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and then you add to that this cacophony of voices and these strange bird calls. It's just a lot to take in, right?
Yeah.
So today we're going to really get into these, intense initial experiences of the Price family when they first arrive in the Congo.
I'm interested.
Yeah, and we're focusing on these specific excerpts that capture those raw first encounters, the ones that set the stage for everything that comes out.
Oh, for sure.
And our goal here is to really understand those fundamental cultural and personal shocks that they faced right from the get-go, because these are the kinds of shocks that will inevitably shape their entire journey and how they interact with this new world.
Right. I mean, it's like they're carrying this invisible baggage.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just their luggage that's heavy. It's almost like they have this excess baggage weighing them down on their bodies, even under their clothes.
Yeah.
It's a lot to carry.
Yeah, and for you, the listener, think about how this, literally layering themselves with familiar possessions speaks to this deeper unpreparedness for what they're about to encounter. It's this clinging to the comforts of home, which makes sense in a way, but it's also kind of ironic considering what's waiting for them.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't just like, packing a few extra things. We're talking about someone wearing 6 pairs of underdrawers, 2 half slips and camisoles, several dresses, one on top of the other. Like, can you even imagine that in the heat of the Congo? It's just crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah, and the contrast with what they expected is so immediate. I mean, the father had this vision of a big old prayer meeting to welcome them, this familiar ritual to help them feel grounded.
Okay.
But what they actually walk into is that overwhelming chanting broil that we talked about. It's like this total sensory experience that just throws them completely off balance.
Yeah, for sure.
And this really highlights a key point. Their preconceived notions about how they'd be received just totally miss the mark.
It's so common, though, right? We try to impose these familiar frameworks onto completely different realities. It's like we're trying to force a square peg into a round hole sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And that's where things get interesting.
Sure.
So think about this for a second. How often do we unknowingly project our own expectations onto new situations without even realizing it?
All the time, I'd say.
Probably. And Rachel's reaction when they arrive really highlights this. I mean, she just comes right out with it and says, man, are we in for it now? Which isn't exactly the, enthusiastic welcome you might expect. Yeah, and she immediately feels like they're not in charge of a thing, not even our own selves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's these intense sensory details that really get to her. That poison green linen suit that suddenly feels completely out of place. The discomfort of being so close to all these strangers and that deafening roar of voices. It's like you can almost feel her sense of being totally overwhelmed.
Absolutely. It's that feeling of vulnerability.
Exactly.
Like all those little things that you normally wouldn't even think about suddenly become huge anxieties. Like she's longing for 5-day deodorant pads and Listerine. It might seem trivial on the surface, but it actually points to this much deeper feeling of being completely out of her element.
Yeah, she's struggling to maintain any sense of self or control in this intensely new environment.
It's like her whole world has been turned upside down.
Totally. And that image of the fire in the church is so powerful. I mean, just seeing that oily smoke and that dark shape within the flames immediately makes Rachel feel like she's slated to die here and now. It just goes to show how deeply unsettling those first moments were for her.
Yeah, it's like this primal fear kicking in.
Right.
All that unfamiliar ritual combined with the sensory overload. It creates this feeling of profound danger, like her familiar world is just crumbling around her and she's confronted with something entirely unknown and potentially threatening.
So for you, the listener, think about how our past experiences can shape our reactions to completely new situations. It's like our brains are trying to make sense of the unfamiliar by drawing on what we already know.
Exactly.
And very soon after they arrive, we start to see these cultural misunderstandings play out in some tangible ways. Like, take Mama Tataba in the garden, for instance. So the family probably had this vision of a typical Western garden, a space for carefully cultivating plants and flowers.
Oh,
But Mama Taba, she comes in and transforms it into 8 neat burial mounds.
really?
Yeah, it's a completely different understanding of the purpose and use of that land.
For sure. It's a totally different worldview.
Right. And for you, this raises some interesting questions. What does this transformation suggest about potentially differing perspectives on life and death? Is it a cultural thing, a spiritual thing, or maybe it's just a practical matter of different agricultural practices?
Maybe a bit of all of those things.
Right. And it's one of the first really stark indicators of how their intentions and actions are going to be interpreted through this completely different cultural lens.
It's like they're speaking different languages even when they're using the same words.
Absolutely. And then there's that seemingly simple act of offering the chickens. The mother does it as a peace offering, this gesture of goodwill.
Oh.
But the father, he's immediately focused on something else, river baptisms. And it highlights a fundamental difference in priorities and this missed opportunity for genuine cultural exchange.
He's so fixated on his own agenda.
Yeah, and it really makes you think about their approach to this new community. Are they truly open to understanding and connecting with these people, or are they just trying to impose their own beliefs and practices?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
they're missing the forest for the trees.
Totally. And then we have Rachel's observations of daily life in the village, which further underscore this cultural contrast. She sees these tired, thin women, children, chasing goats, women effortlessly carrying incredible bundles on their heads. It's a world so different from her own.
It's fascinating how those small details can reveal so much about a culture.
Yeah, and her fascination with their balance particularly. It's like she recognizes this skill that's both practical and almost extraordinary to her. It makes you think about how we often notice and value things that are outside of our own experience.
It's like we're seeing the world through fresh eyes.
Exactly. And then there's this palpable sense of isolation. They're living on the banks of the Quilu River, which is described as their throughway, their potential link to the outside world. But they're totally reliant on this guy, Mr. Axelroot, who is unreliable, to say the least.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it really emphasizes their vulnerability and disconnection, both geographically and culturally.
It's like being stranded on an island.
Right. And for you, the listener, think about what this sense of isolation suggests about their initial experience. It's
Yeah.
like they're both physically and metaphorically far removed from everything familiar.
Makes sense.
And then we have the father's sermon, which is this pivotal moment in revealing these cultural clashes. He delivers this booming pronouncement, up, get ye out from this place of darkness, arise and come forward into a brighter land. It's said with so much conviction.
Oh, boy.
But the Congolese people's reaction, it's so telling. At first, there's this joy and excitement, but then it shifts to confusion and dismay, and ultimately, the women end up covering their breasts. It's a clear indication that his words are being interpreted through a completely different cultural and spiritual framework.
The classic example of miscommunication.
Right, and it really underscores the assumptions underlying his message. He's operating from this very specific worldview, and he's failing to recognize and respect the existing beliefs and customs of the community.
It's like he's talking at them instead of with them.
Exactly. And this moment is a perfect example of why it's so important to pause and reflect on these cross-cultural encounters, to really consider the different perspectives at play. It reminds me of Mindful Moments in our podcasts, this AI audiobook analysis YouTube channel that often explores these nuanced layers of understanding in different stories.
Yeah, it's all about taking a step back and trying to see things from multiple angles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just the adults who are grappling with these cultural differences. Even the children's seemingly innocent observations are so revealing. Like Ruth May, for example, she describes the African Communist Boy Scouts as Jimmy Crow.
No, huh?
Yeah, it shows how she's trying to make sense of this new reality through the limited lens of her own experiences back home.
It's like she's trying to fit this new information into her existing mental categories, even if it doesn't quite fit.
Right, and for you, the listener, it highlights the challenges that children face when encountering different cultures. They don't have the same frame of reference, so they rely on what they know, even if it's inaccurate or inappropriate.
Yes.
And then you have the mother's realization, which is so simple, yet so profound. She says, we brought all the wrong things. And it's not just about the material possessions. It's about their preconceived notions and expectations, their entire way of thinking. It's this dawning awareness that they're utterly unprepared for the realities of this new world.
That's a humbling moment, for sure.
It is, and it signifies a huge shift in her thinking. She's starting to recognize the limitations of their previous worldview and the need for some serious adaptation.
She's starting to let go of her old assumptions.
Right. And even something as seemingly minor as Methuselah the parrot's outbursts is significant. I mean, he starts shouting things like, damn, and piss off, which is kind of funny, but it also symbolizes this loss of control within the father's own household.
It's like even the parrot is rebelling.
Totally. It's this disruption of his expected order and authority. And for you, the listener, it might represent this broader theme of their loss of control in this unfamiliar setting.
I like that.
And then there's Leah's attempts to connect, which are also really telling. She starts trying to learn the local language, and she initially sees their backyard as this untouched Garden of Eden.
Right.
But her encounter with Pascal quickly highlights the real difficulties of genuine communication and understanding. They're both trying so hard, but they just can't quite bridge the gap.
It's more than just words, isn't it?
Exactly. And Leah's initial optimism, followed by that communication barrier, really highlights the complexities of cross-cultural connection. It's not enough to just learn the language. You have to understand the culture, the context, the nuances.
It's about empathy and perspective taking.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then there's that incident at the marketplace with Leah accidentally stepping over the oranges.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, the reaction from the local woman is so intense. She feels like she's been slapped down to nothing. And it's this really harsh lesson in cultural sensitivities that they were completely unaware of.
It's a reminder that even the smallest actions can have big consequences in a different culture.
Yeah, and it highlights the potential for unintentional offense when you're in a new environment. It's like you're constantly walking on eggshells because you don't know all the rules.
You have to be so mindful.
Right. And amidst all this initial shock and misunderstanding, we do get these glimpses of resilience and adaptation, like the strength and balance of the Congolese women carrying those heavy loads or their social interactions within the village. It hints at the richness and inherent strength of this culture that they've entered.
It's like a silver lining.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that even though the Price family is struggling, there's so much to learn and appreciate about this new community.
It's about finding those moments of connection and beauty.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to remember that these early cultural misunderstandings aren't failures. They're just the messy beginnings of a complex learning process.
It's all part of the journey.
Right. And these differences, even when they feel jarring and uncomfortable, they ultimately present opportunities for gaining new perspectives. So for you, the listener, think about how you can reframe your own mistakes in unfamiliar situations. Can you see them as opportunities for growth and learning?
It's about embracing the discomfort.
Totally. And even in those fleeting moments of observation, those glimpses into daily life, we see the potential for connection. It reminds us that even across huge cultural divides, shared human experiences can create bridges.
It's about finding that common ground.
Yeah. And it reinforces the idea that shared humanity exists even amidst vast differences.
I like that a lot.
So as we wrap up today, think about the Price family facing all these cultural and personal shocks, navigating this landscape riddled with misunderstandings, each individual grappling with their own reactions to this overwhelming new world.
It's a lot to process.
It is, and it's just the beginning of their journey.
Right, and it makes you wonder how much of our own understanding of the world is shaped by our first impressions.
That's a good question.
Yeah, like how do those initial judgments influence our perceptions, even if they're incomplete or maybe even inaccurate?
That's a really powerful thought to consider.
It is.
So if you found this exploration insightful, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future deep dives. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, definitely share it with them.
Yes, spread the word.
And if you want to delve even deeper into the Price family's story, we've included a link where you can purchase the source material. And most importantly, keep thinking critically about the complexities of cultural exchange and the many layers within the stories we encounter.
Absolutely.
Okay, until next time.
See ya.
Bye.